Hi, I'm Lizzie Asarno with Albany Student Broadcasting. We're here in Albany High School's Little Theater, and I'm with Principal Ted Barone. Tonight, Albany High School is holding a panel discussion on choices, responsibilities, and self-protection for teens. Mr. Barone, what is the context for tonight's panel discussion?
Hi, Lizzie. First of all, I want to say that the last 6 weeks here in the Albany community, we have experienced some pretty severe traumas. And the context for this event is that we really want our students, our parents, our teachers to feel safer and more connected to their community. To do so, they need to understand what's appropriate, what's inappropriate behaviors between students and between students and adults. They need to understand what the legal implications are of their behaviors. There's a lot of definitions that need to be addressed. There's issues of mandated reporting. There's issues of the kind of treatment that we give to the students and the people who are courageous in reporting different kinds of behaviors. And then we also really want to have create an environment where everybody feels much safer. We build a safe and caring community, as this community has always been, but we're experiencing quite a crisis right now.
Yeah. And who are we going to hear from tonight?
We're going to hear from two psychologists, actually one psychologist, one social worker from Berkeley Mental Health, and they're going to be speaking about relationships, healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships, as well as community building. And then we're also going to hear from an attorney who specializes in school law, labor law, who's going to speak more about the legal terms, the legal definitions of the issues that we're going to be dealing with all evening.
Well, sounds good. And lastly, what do you think that the community and students are going to learn from this panel discussion?
I hope that they come away with, of course, a deeper understanding of what's okay and what's not okay, what the legal implications are of those, that they feel the courage to speak up when something doesn't feel right, and that also that our teachers and our adults understand that this is not a witch hunt. This is about trying to protect all of us, protect our entire community, and that there are certain steps we have to follow in order to protect our community, and it's good for everybody.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Barone, and we will be right back with the broadcast of tonight's panel discussion. You're tuning in to Albany High School's panel discussion on choices, responsibilities, and self-protection for teens. The show should start momentarily. Thanks.
There's plenty of seats right here in the middle and up frontish, and make yourself comfortable. We're going to have a great conversation. Good if everybody starts out comfortably. All right. Let's get going. First of all, I want to welcome you, those of you who are not Albany High people, to welcome to Albany High School. Really glad that everybody is here. And I know all of you teenagers came because you wanted to, not because of extra credit. Hey, you learn in all kinds of different places, so this is as good as any. I want to welcome our Superintendent Stevenson, who's in attendance, and also board members Maris and Lowe. Are there any other board members present? Okay. So let's get to it. Over the past 6 weeks, this community has experienced a set of traumas that have injured us and strained our capacity to cope. An important step in the process of healing is the ability to speak frankly about the issues, of course, within the limits of the law. Tonight's conversation is designed to increase the safety of our students and the adults that serve them, and to help renew the connections that bind us together as a community. As a school, our mission is education, and we believe that a safe community comes from common understandings and agreements about what's right and wrong, legal and illegal. A safe community has systems in place to stop threats and support the courageous who speak out against those threats. We've assembled a small group of experts in their fields who will help remind us what our existing community agreements are, how the law frames the issues, and what further steps we can take to provide a safe, inclusive environment for students and adults. Now, each of our panelists has a 10 to 15-minute presentation that was developed in response to a set of questions that were provided to them ahead of time. The questions that you may have seen in the flyers, they've been all over the place, plus a few others. We will then spend the rest of our time together until about 9 o'clock in a question and answer format. And when that time comes, if you'd like to ask a question, we have this microphone set up over here, but also you may have received an index card when you came in. So if you're not comfortable coming up, please write down your question, and our vice principals, Ms. Banal and Ms. Charlotte, will be walking around in various intervals to pick up the questions, hand them to me, and I'll do my best to answer as many of them as possible. Because our time is limited and there's a lot to discuss, please keep your questions and your comments brief and to the point. I also want to thank Albany Broadcasting, which is televising tonight's discussion, and will make their broadcasts available for download from our website soon, and we'll make that announcement when we do that. Now, allow me to introduce to you our wonderful and generous panel who have come together to help us tonight. On your left is Mitch Radin. He's a licensed clinical psychologist who has worked for Berkeley Mental Health since 1998 on the mobile crisis team in the Adult Services Clinic. The mobile crisis team works in the community with the Berkeley and Albany police and fire departments and responds to mental health and family crises with the intention of stabilizing those crises in the field or assisting people with accessing acute psychiatric or medical care. In the middle is Karen Resendiz, who's an attorney with Lozano Smith's Walnut Creek office. She specializes in the areas of employment law, labor negotiations, student issues, special education, and general school law. Formerly a school administrator, Karen's JD is from Santa Clara University, and she received her BS from CSU East Bay in business administration with an emphasis in personnel and industrial relations. Finally, on your far right is Francine Ortega. She's been working for the City of Berkeley's Mental Health Division since 2003, after obtaining her Master's of Social Welfare from UC Berkeley. She provides outreach and psychotherapy to families, children, and youth of all ages in a variety of community settings. Much of her work is school-based, where she offers early intervention services to youth to promote wellness and resilience. Francine is bilingual, Mexican, Peruvian, American, and is dedicated to working with the Latino community. Thank you all for being here. So I'm first going to turn the conversation over to Mitch, and he's been asked to speak about the topic of relationships. Mitch.
Can everybody hear me? Is that okay? Okay. Does anybody here know the Heimlich maneuver? Okay. If I start choking on a cough drop in the middle of this, let's come up to the front. Thanks.
There's several right up here in the front, in the middle, over there on the right, or to the left. Thank you.
Okay, so I think first I want to acknowledge the... Sure, get closer. that better? First, I want to acknowledge why everybody's here and how important it is that you're all here. You know, the origins of this panel is sad and pretty profound in a lot of ways, and I think it speaks to the kind of fear and a shock that things are happening in your community that you don't know about until you're too late, an anxiety that you know, people that seem to be trusted individuals in your community turn out to be predators or alleged predators. And I'm not speaking specifically about Mr. I think I'm speaking about a lot of people in the community. And it just sets up a particular kind of anxiety, I think, that has everybody on edge right now. And I think that's an important thing to think about when your parents, when you're talking to your teens or thinking about this stuff in relationship to your teens, about their safety, and for teens thinking about what it means for you to be safe and whether the kind of vigilance you need to have when you're out in the world. So the questions asked of me tonight are pretty lofty. And if I knew the answers to all of them, I'd be a pretty famous guy and you guys would be really, really lucky to have me up here, but I don't. And nobody really has all the answers to it. But, you know, the things here about building appropriate relationships, understanding and setting personal boundaries, responsibly managing your sexuality and emotional lives, I mean, those are the developmental tasks of teenagers. And you guys all know that because you're teenagers and we've all been teenagers. So there's one answer to all of these questions which starts to answer the questions, and I think the answer is find a way to talk to your parents, and parents figure out a way to talk to your kids, or guardians or important people in your life if you don't feel comfortable talking to your parents, and parents if you don't feel comfortable talking to your kids about it. We'll go into that stuff a little bit more in a minute, but you know, study after study shows that children who have accessible parents, or parents who are open to talking about difficult issues, who are available to discuss things that might be uncomfortable, tend to be a lot less prone to get involved with drugs, sex, probably not rock and roll, but risky kinds of behaviors. And even more so, children who have parents who are involved and also have at least 3 other responsible adults in their life that, even if they're not talking about you know, issues of sex and the more difficult stuff, knowing that there's somebody out there that's safe, that you could go to if you need to, it really reduces you know, the incidence of dangerous kinds of behaviors, risky kinds of behaviors. So the first thing I want to talk to for the adults is a phenomenon which afflicts some of us, not all of us, but some of us to an extent, is this weird thing about adult amnesia, how somehow suddenly we forget what it was like to be a teenager, forget all the things that we did that might have been risky, and how it felt to be involved in relationships and the intensity of the relationships that, you know, now I think some people call it puppy love, or as though these relationships aren't real love or real emotionally important events in people's lives. It's important to take a minute and reflect on the kinds of things that you did as a teenager, and figure out what kind of standard you're going to hold your child to with respect to how you held yourself, what standard you held yourself to. And teenagers and kids, there's the issue of impulse control, and the whole idea that, you know, you're teenagers and you make mistakes, and you're going to do impulsive and risky things. And all that stuff is true, but what we know also now is that teenagers are actually more likely, I don't know if it's more able, but more likely to delay gratification and wait to make appropriate and important decisions than adults. especially if there's a reward involved in the end. It's a recent study that came out, and it kind of throws kind of mud in the face of those other studies that, you know, teenagers are just crazy individuals running around doing crazy stuff all the time, which just isn't true. So you do have an ability to sit back, think about the kinds of things that you're doing, and think about what you want from the kinds of relationships that you're in, the kinds of things that you're doing with regards to drugs and sex and relationships. So that leaves the question of sort of a talk, and how do you talk to your kids about it? And that really is the answer to this whole thing. It's how do you talk to each other about this kind of stuff? And kids, who do you talk to if you don't feel like you can talk to your parents about it? Some study, I don't remember where it was, but it's a number of studies, show that at least 9 out of 10 kids, 8 or 9 out of 10 kids, wish that they were able to talk to their parents about difficult issues. If not sex, other things that are difficult in their life. And I think probably 10 out of 10 parents wish that they were able to talk to their kids about these issues. So I think the first thing the sex talk, it's important to actually have the talk about the sex talk and not just leave a book on your teenager's bedstand or leave it somewhere where they're going to stumble upon it.
That was bad.
Yeah.
Right.
It wasn't bad. No, but it sets up a sense that you know, your parents know that you parents know that there's something going on, that your kids are at an age where they might be engaging in this in sexual contact, but that it's a scary thing to talk about and a difficult thing to talk about, and it puts the onus on them to talk to you. So for parents, figuring out a way to be able to talk to your kids about this stuff is kind of paramount, and you have to think about how uncomfortable that conversation is, to think about talking with kids about sex and uncomfortable issues. It's a hard thing to talk about. It's uncomfortable for you, it's uncomfortable for the kids, but ultimately it's an easier conversation than having to talk to your kid when they come to you with oral gonorrhea or HIV, and having to then discuss that there was sexual contact, but they didn't know how to do it properly, or that there were things going on that may have been uncomfortable or unwanted. So I guess the primary thing for parents is listen and don't lecture. Find some space to sit back and talk to your kids. Have a conversation about it, but don't judge anything at first. Find some space to just sit back, take a deep breath, and listen to it, as hard as it is to listen to, probably. And figure out a way to manage your own response to it. You get to have your own ideas about what you're willing to allow your child to do or not, but you know your kids are going to do things whether you want them to or not. So your only option is to try to provide them with your sense of right and wrong, your sense of morals around sexual relationships and difficult things that the average teenager comes across on a daily basis. And teenagers, you have to somehow or other come up with the guts to say what you need to say. I guess there's no other way to talk about it than that. But I think the side of this I think that people really probably want me to speak to is the issue of what to do when something uncomfortable comes up for your teenager, and what to do for teenagers when you're not sure about a relationship, or you're feeling uncomfortable about a relationship or something that's happening. I'm a big fan of using your gut. I think most kids know, most people know when something feels weird, when something's a little bit wonky, and when something feels uncomfortable. But a lot of times it's uncomfortable to recognize that in yourself, or you feel like it's too uncomfortable to tell somebody that it feels uncomfortable. And that's where sort of the parents or somebody else comes in handy, when you feel like you have somebody to go to. But if your kid doesn't have anybody to go to, and teenagers, if you don't have anybody to go to, you're kind of left to your own devices to figure out what to do. And you don't feel like you have that's generally how a lot of things happen when children are victimized, or in teenage relationships. Things happen between couples that are uncomfortable. Some people feel forced to do sexual things that they don't want to do. Some people feel harassed, but they just don't feel like they have anywhere to go with it, because the experience of it is so embarrassing and maybe shameful. It's just an extraordinarily uncomfortable thing to have happen to you and to have to go through. So setting up a system in your family where it's okay to talk about things. That's different for every family and every, it's the culture of your family. What's the culture of, talking about difficult things. Hopefully after tonight, after, hearing us and kind of thinking about this in vivo, it's a teachable moment. You guys can go home and talk about it and, think about it with your family about how maybe you can talk about this and what you can do to get support, and how you might feel like you would want your parents to respond. And parents, think about how you were as teenagers and how you would have wanted your parents to respond to things and how your parents did respond to things, and use that as a framework for how you want to talk to your kids and what kinds of messages you want to send to your kids. And you get to have opposing ideas, and this is the time when we're not we're not gonna be, parents are not gonna be their kids' friends at this point. Parents are gonna be the kids' parents, and kids get to be mad at their parents and have differing opinions, and sometimes the parents are gonna be right, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes, hopefully, the parents who are wrong are gonna reflect on it and come back to the kid and say, I was wrong, and have a larger discussion about how things are going. People need time to think about things sometimes. The other thing, and I think specific to what allegedly happened with Mr. I, and I think with a lot of the other things that have happened, the kinds of things that can happen, are related to what they call a quid pro quo relationship, and I think that's generally what happens when teens get lured into doing things that they don't feel comfortable doing, and that's usually when a school official or somebody in some position of authority says, I'll certainly be happy to raise your grade, or I'll be happy to do something if you come out for coffee with me, we can talk about it. If you, go to a movie with me, we can think about how this works. I mean, I don't know how it really goes down, but when there's a negotiation around something that shouldn't be negotiated, and there's an invitation for some kind of personal contact around that negotiation, that's when you guys need to be alerted that something's wrong. And teachers need to be aware of this stuff too, because some of your teachers are great and have very personal relationships with you, and they should, but managing those relationships in a responsible way, in a contained way, is, I think, the important thing. And if your teachers are making you uncomfortable and they don't intend to, hopefully you'll be able to say something to them. But it's complicated, and that's another thing. It's, if that kind of thing happens, there's a person in authority, it feels extraordinarily uncomfortable, and how do you challenge the person in authority that they might be doing something wrong? How do you talk to anybody about it? And that's, again, when you have the fallback position where hopefully there's somebody in your life or somebody in your family you can talk to.
So Mitch, why don't we have plenty of time for questions. I'm going to hand it on to Karen next. I also want to point out that
we just
there's
heard
some
from
handouts
Mitch Radin,
that we
licensed
made 100
clinical
copies
psychologist.
of, and we have more than that here. All documents that were handed out tonight are also going to be posted in PDF form on the website, Albany High School website, starting tomorrow. So if you didn't pick one up, they'll be available for download tomorrow. Karen.
Thank you. Let me know if you can't hear me. I'm Karen Resendiz. I'm the only lawyer on this panel. And
We're now
these
hearing
topics are
from
so
Karen
painful,
M.
I can
Resendez,
tell by
attorney
looking
with
at all your
Lozano
faces in the
Smith's
audience.
Walnut
You've
Creek
been through
office.
quite a bit in your community. The thing is that your community isn't the only community that's going through this. Think about what you heard in the news about about Penn State, local districts that are nearby. Just on Monday, a principal was convicted for failing to make a report to Child Protective Services regarding some suspicion that she had that a child at her school was being abused. So every day you're bombarded with these kinds of issues and topics, and I have 2 high school students, and when we talk about it, despite all of the media attention that there is about these topics, and despite how desensitized teenagers and adults have become relative to things that deal with sex, it's something that you would be surprised how many people are not familiar with what are the rules that govern what a school district absolutely has to do in circumstances where there's a suspicion of child abuse. And so one of the things that I was asked to do is cover some of those rules so you would have a general framework of what those are. And so in California, as in every state, there's a mandated reporter law. And what that law requires is that at this point, anybody who works for the school district, any adult that works with the school district, is legally mandated by law to report any reasonable suspicion of physical child abuse, sexual child abuse, neglect, and they have some obligations with regard to emotional abuse. They're a little bit different than for those other types of abuse. But they're all mandated to report. Did you all hear the word I used? Suspicion. So your teachers, your custodians, your counselors, all of those individuals have that responsibility unto themselves. And it's not that they are responsible for going out and investigating whether or not an act or abuse actually occurred. What they're supposed to do is notify Child Protective Services or local law enforcement and have them investigate it. And the reason for that law is that your teachers and the people that work for your district, they don't necessarily have the skills or the legal authority to do the investigation that's necessary to protect kids. And so their immediate responsibility is to notify the folks that do, because their first obligation is to keep all of you guys safe and all of the students that they're responsible for safe. And so that might be something that you're not familiar with. It's a reasonable suspicion, not that they know it happened. And if you want to read a very, very sad story, look at what happened to the San Jose principal who was just convicted on Monday. She had some information that a child in her school was being sexually abused. She couldn't believe that it was true because it was a teacher who was well-respected, loved by a lot of people, and she didn't want to believe the information that she was hearing because it was so out of character. So just to put it in context, she was convicted of a crime because she didn't act on her suspicion. Not that she didn't act on convincing evidence that this thing occurred, but she didn't act on just being suspicious. So that's why it's so important for everyone to understand how broad that responsibility is. The other thing that is widely misunderstood has to do with administrative leave. That's when an employee of a school district is asked to go on a leave. Sometimes they're paid while they're on that leave, and sometimes they're unpaid. All of that is typically on unpaid leave. It typically happens when someone gets arrested and charged with certain crimes or offenses. So if a teacher gets arrested for engaging in a sexual assault against a student, then that's something that's completely outside of the district's discretion. They have to immediately place that person on leave before a trial even occurs, possibly well in advance of any sort of a final resolution as to whether or not that alleged conduct actually happened. And so that's something else that I think is widely misunderstood about placing people on leave. Sometimes it's just required by the Ed Code. Another thing that I've heard has been a question here has to do with the issue of consent. Who can consent to engaging in a sexual relationship. Well, if you read the law, it's somewhat hard to believe, I think, for some teenagers, but what it says is that no one under the age of 18 can consent to any type of sexual conduct. That's even more important when it comes to relationships with adults. So anyone who's 18 or older, a student who's 17 or 16 cannot consent legally under the eyes of California law to a sexual relationship with that person. Now I say that, and having said that to teens in my life, they don't believe it, first of all, but it's true. And why is it important for all of you to know that? Well, for those of you who are under 18, you can understand why that might be important. But for those of you who are 18 or older, if the partner that you're with may seem like they're consenting, they are consenting, you're in a relationship, and then something goes wrong, and they decide that they no longer want that relationship, they could report it, and it could be considered statutory rape. A parent could report it, and both parties involved could be involved in a criminal matter of statutory rape. You could think someone's over 18 and have them not be over 18 and still be in that situation. So it's something that's not natural for us to hear in current society, especially in the Bay Area in California, but it is what the law provides. And so I wanted to share that, and I just touched upon things that I think are not commonly known. There's a lot more to mandated reporting and who's responsible and how quickly you have to respond, but I do want us to have lots of time for questions because I think that's really important. So thank you.
Before we go to Francine, just remember that after Francine is done with her portion of the panel, will be time for questions and answers. So if you have some questions that are coming to your mind now, which I imagine you are, jot them down, and you can again either someone will pick them up and I'll read them, or it'll just help you remember what your questions are when you come to the mic. So Francine.
Yeah. So again, like Mitch said, is that volume okay? These are really big, important questions, and I don't pretend to have all of the answers either, and I'm hoping that we can have some conversation and want to make sure that there's plenty of room for question and answer. I'm just going to put out some ideas about how to make our community safe. That's what I was asked to speak about and kind of address some questions about what makes a trusting and safe community, and that's pretty broad. But the things that immediately come to mind, I think, are what you're all doing right now, and that's acknowledging that things like this happen, and we can't pretend that they don't. And addressing it and coming out and thinking about it and thinking about ways to talk about it together is really important. Communication and thinking about community as a bunch of relationships that we have, and how can we make our relationships stronger and better, and how can we use them to support each other in youth. And these terms are pretty vague. What does it come down to? I think day to day. I think it's giving opportunities, making opportunities every day to check in with students in class and at home. And occasionally maybe even asking, is there something you're not telling me about, something that's going on, that you've been wanting to tell me you're not sure about, as opposed to kind of talking about things or warning teens about things that might happen or that are scary. It's really kind of giving lots of openings all the time and practicing it every day in small ways with everyone. Because I think the more open a community is, the more communication there is, the more people we have to go to when there are problems, and the easier it is for people to speak out and then take responsibility. And I think that's another part of a healthy community, is when we take responsibility for our own contributions and then also for other people's contributions. So, like's been alluded to, we don't stand back and say, oh, well, that couldn't happen. That's not happening here. It wouldn't happen with this person. It's really about, it's much more complicated than that, I think. Thinking about Mr. I, who I know is also a very well-loved person. It's not so black and white that Charles Manson's going to come down the street and attack us. It's usually much more subtle, and relationships are hard. They're funky and fuzzy, and the more we're talking about them and working on them, I think the better it's going to be for everyone. And that's in the classroom, that's peer-to-peer, and it's not just around preventing sexual abuse. I think it's around bullying and cyberbullying and all of the things that teens have to deal with today. If anything, I think they need more people to talk to, not just parents, but other adults, to get different perspectives. We need to make sure people have voices and there's room for different perspectives. So your perspective as a parent is going to be different from your students, it's going to be different from Mr. I's, it's going to be different from his family. Thinking about it from, I think, different angles can only help us if we're trying to understand how does something like this happen and what can we do to keep it from happening less in our communities. And I think there are also, systematic kind of programs that can help people practice values. Restorative justice programs. I'm not sure what's used at this school, but around respect and respecting teens and coming at them at their level. I think we often want to talk down to them and use judgment and give lots of advice. And I think probably what teens need more of is to be come at with respect. Like what's going on with you, and how can I support you? And that's not to say you shouldn't advise or counsel, but I think you're going to get a lot more in if you're coming at them more at an equal level in some ways. I don't know, I guess it's really about culture change, and part of culture change is changing relationships, and I'm sure there are so many amazing relationships here in Albany. It's really about enriching them and thinking about what you can do every day to do that. Do you check in with people? How are you doing? How are you really doing? Not just, how was school today? That's most of what I have to say. I guess I'd prefer to do Q&A to get more into detail.
Thank you, Francine.
Yeah.
Karen,
I just wanted to add one other thing for the students and adults that are here that I didn't mention, and that is just
We just heard from
importance if
Francine
you feel
Ortega,
like you're in
licensed
an
clinical
uncomfortable
social worker.
situation, you don't even maybe know if you're being disrespected or mistreated, but you feel very uncomfortable or you feel uncomfortable, seek out someone here at the school, seek out a trusted adult in your life and talk to them about it. Make sure that I think you said your gut instincts, those awkward feelings that you might have are discussed so that something doesn't happen to you beyond that, or that so that someone who can guide you through it can analyze what's going on and give you some suggestions for how to deal with a teacher who, and I'm not saying this happens here, but deal with a teacher who might say something that makes you feel uncomfortable, like let's go to coffee and let's discuss your grade. Maybe it's completely innocent, but maybe you felt very uncomfortable, and how to handle that as you continue in the class.
I would also add to that, if the first person you tell doesn't listen to you, go find somebody else and keep talking to people until you find somebody who listens to you and believes you. Because I think some teens give up. If it's something new for them, and you go to an adult and they don't listen to you, they slam the door in your face, you're like, forget this, I'm not gonna talk anymore. Keep talking, going until you find somebody. There should never be secrets. If there's some kind of uncomfortable thing that's a secret and somebody's telling you it should be a secret, then that's a big sign that that's not okay, especially if it's involving touch, that is feeling you're not so sure if it's okay. If somebody's telling you it's a secret, you got to keep it a secret or else. That's a big clue that something's not probably right.
Okay, so thank you all very much for your introductory comments. Really helped set a great framework for our Q&A. A little bit of business. If you do have a question that you've written down that you prefer to have me ask for you, if you could pass it off to the sides, and our vice principals will walk down the aisle and pick up your questions. If you would like to come up to the mic and ask a question, please do so now. I also want to just apologize for the mess around here. We're in full production with the ironic choice of Romeo and Juliet, but it's planned way in advance. I also want to just note that one of the forms you got when you walked in was a PTSA survey about future community education selections. So please do complete that. There's a box, I believe, on your way out that you can put it in. So, do we have somebody who would like to come up to the microphone and okay, here's a question, and while other people are coming up to line up, please do that. This question is it ever okay to have a teacher drive you home? For example, if a teacher lives close to me and I don't have a ride home.
Well, I can answer that it's not specifically illegal. It depends on the context and the circumstances. It's probably not the best situation, and I would recommend typically against it, but there are going to be circumstances where it might make sense. You're in a bad neighborhood or a bad situation, and it might be okay. I think of situations with sporting events. I don't know if there are times with field trips or other things, but there are going to be situations where you just don't feel comfortable about that. And if you don't, that's when you definitely shouldn't. And I would recommend against it typically. What do you guys think?
Is there a school policy
about
that?
I was going to wait until you're all done. Specifically, teachers are not allowed to drive their students home, or any students, unless it is part of an official event, such as they're a coach that has got authorization from parents. It's all signed off, authorizing transportation. As you know, we don't have a lot of buses to go to sporting events. So sometimes coaches' parents are driving kids. They're supposed to drive them here. Parents are supposed to pick them up. So, generally should not be allowed. Teachers are not allowed to drive kids home. You shouldn't take a ride from a teacher or any other adult official on this campus. Okay. Other questions? Come on. I know it just takes a few to open up the floodgates. So I know you've got some questions, so bring them on. You're a shy bunch, aren't you? Okay. How can the school community support the alleged victims?
I guess I can take that. Everybody's looking at me. I think it really depends on the victim and what their needs are. I think victims need to be supported and celebrated for speaking out. It takes a lot of courage. It's also a very private thing, so I imagine that it would be difficult to show up at school once the word got out that you'd spoken out if it was not something that you wanted to advertise. So I think it really depends case by case, and I don't know, is there a school policy on that? No, probably not.
Community question.
I mean, I really think it's about supporting people for having a voice. There's a lot of shame around victims of sexual abuse. They don't want to talk about it. They've often been coerced into keeping it a secret, and it takes a lot of courage to come out and report something like that, especially if it was somebody that you loved or trusted. So I think if you can really understand that, then people deserve celebrations and kudos. And what do you need? They need support. They need healing. And I think everybody's healing process is different and takes a different amount of time, and that needs to be respected, including their need for privacy. If that's what's needed. And unfortunately, I think with the media and when big things happen like this, that's the last thing that is given to victims. So, but that's part of being an ally, I guess, to any kind of victim of any kind of abuse. It's not just not waiting for them to speak up, but it's helping them to speak up and supporting them to speak up. So if you're witnessing something, you speak up as well, and that's kind of accountability and responsibility, what I was talking about earlier. It's not just being accountable and responsible for yourself, like, oh, that's not my business. If you see or get wind of something going on, it's okay to ask and to talk about it, to talk to somebody. Yeah, that's...
I think the other part of that too is, there's usually somebody out there who doesn't believe it or wants to make fun of it or has some, opinion about it. And I think one way to support a victim is to stand up for them, to, voice your opinion that, it's a sensitive thing no matter what, and, keep those kinds of comments to yourself, or in whatever way you want to defend somebody. It's that kind of bullying that is one of the worst after effects for victims.
And on the bullying piece, your district has a policy against bullying. So if you don't feel comfortable standing up because you think it might put you at risk, there are things that you should do that maybe you can do confidentially to let the administrators at your school or a trusted teacher know that this type of treatment is happening, so that maybe they can do some intervention to support the individual.
Just a quick follow-up also. We've had some incidents of some cyber bullying where people have made comments on various social media that are rather offensive to the victim. And so when you see that, I think it's important to step up in support of the courageous ones, and to acknowledge their power in making those statements coming forth. Okay, we have a number of questions of all different sorts. Here's one. I heard once at school that there's something called a grace period in regard to sexual contact between adults and minors. I heard that if the two people are within 3 years of each other, like 15 to 18, 16 to 19, 17 to 20, that there is some kind of exception. Is this true?
What you're referring to is under mandated reporter laws. As I mentioned before, anyone who's younger than 18 can't cannot consent to sexual conduct. However, whether or not sex between an 21-year-old and a 17-year-old is something that has to be reported as child abuse, is that 3-year reference that that's referring to. And a mandated reporter, a school official, would not necessarily have to report that kind of sexual conduct where there's a 3-year window in certain circumstances. If someone's under 14, and there's no exception, there's no 3-year rule. That 3-year rule only applies to the obligation of the mandated reporter to report, and it's very narrow, and it doesn't apply to anything where there's an assault or there's some conduct where the person that's involved in that situation does not want to participate. But in that case where they do not want to participate in that activity, it's still a mandated report by the mandated reporter. So there are some exceptions, but that's not an exception to the criminal aspects of sexual conduct between minors or between minors and adults.
The next question, if I'm already going out with a 17-year-old and I turn 18, in other words, I'm 17 going out with a 17-year-old, and I turn 18, is that seriously frowned upon if we have sexual relations?
So that's real, right? That's real life. In terms of that, in terms of a mandated report or a school employee being obligated to report that to Child Protective Services, there is no obligation for a teacher or custodian or anyone who works for the school district to report that to Child Protective Services, as long as there's no assault involved, as long as there's no pressuring someone against their will. On the other hand, if one of those, if that minor or one of their parents or somebody else chooses to go down to the police department and claim that the minor was statutorily raped, it is a crime. So that doesn't happen very often, but it could happen, especially if a relationship breaks up, or someone ends up pregnant, or someone ends up with a sexually transmitted disease. That's when those things typically get put into law enforcement's hands.
Hello, Serena. I fight with my son. Sometimes it's just play. Sometimes it becomes a real fight. He fights back at me. Is that called child abuse?
So this is a parent and their child.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of self-defense, that's not child abuse. In terms of corporal punishment, there's a very big range of what a fight with your son could mean. And so there are going to be instances that are clearly not child abuse and instances where it clearly is child abuse. But for a school official or a school employee, what's important is if you feel that it's crossed the line into child abuse, that you report it. And then you let the proper agency either ignore it if they feel like it's not, or investigate it if they feel that it is. But it's not the school's responsibility to decide whether or not it is. It ends up being those charged with that responsibility, law enforcement or Child Protective Services.
Okay. Some incredible questions here. Trying to figure out what order to do them in. Please speak about the possible damage done by false allegations.
Yeah, that's a big question, and they're devastating. I mean, they're devastating for everybody involved. And you know, specifically, I think it would differ from case to case, but ultimately, you know, whoever made a false allegation is disturbed in some way. You know, had something in them that they needed to manage in a way that was inappropriate. And for the person who was accused, it's, you know, it's a horrible thing to be accused of, and can affect their job, can affect their marriage, can affect their relationship with their kids, their friends, and it's just a devastating thing all the way around. And yeah, I think that's about as best I can answer that.
Right. The laws were written to protect minors, and oftentimes there are multiple victims in some of these situations. The family of the alleged perpetrator, possibly the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator could be innocent. So there are a lot of victims in these situations, and you know, that's the reality, because the number one priority is the safety of children, unfortunately.
How do you find a balance between grief and refinding a motivation for you to move on from the grief and be able to work, go to school again.
No, I think I can take it. Grief is a individual process, and there's no time limit on it. Everybody has their own way of getting through it. If you're feeling like your grief is really big and you're feeling worse as weeks go along, you're not functioning well, it's affecting your school, then you might want to go talk to somebody. But it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard to lose somebody and to be in pain and to try to get through the day. And I think being forgiving of yourself and making sure you're taking care of yourself every day, just in the most basic ways. You know, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're keeping your same routine, you're asking for help, you're talking to people, you're being good to yourself. And then if those things aren't working, then it's time to maybe talk to somebody and see if there's some way you can feel better.
And I think I agree that there's no one way to grieve, and everybody grieves differently. I think the one thing that's most important is to recognize that there's no abnormal way to grieve. Everybody has a different response to it, and some people are just devastated by grief and can't function for a period of time, and then slowly come out of it, and that's one normal way to grieve. Some people don't feel anything right away, and a week or two later, suddenly they can't concentrate, they're getting headaches, they can't sleep or read, and then realize that this might be a response to the loss of someone. So I think reminding oneself that whatever you're going through is normal, and if you really feel like you can't manage it, I think it's just like Francine said. I think you find somebody to talk to, a professional, if you need it.
There were some flyers on the front table about grief, and there's this Bill of Rights for teens experiencing grief that I really like. So I'll make sure that Principal Barone gets some hard copies too, in case people want to take more home, or they could be posted on the website, not sure.
Okay, these questions are not getting any easier. I'm going to give you a two-part question that kind of flow one from the next. Should you report to someone if you are suspecting that a friend is being abused? And then what happens after someone reports a suspicion?
I guess I could start. You never need permission to do the right thing is sort of the motto that I always operate under. I've been talking about all these laws, but that's what it boils down to. And if you think someone is being abused, do the right thing. Let someone in authority, someone an adult that you trust that might be more familiar with how to help you, and use Francine's advice, which I think is amazing advice, which is if the first adult you contact doesn't, or the first person you contact doesn't support you, find somebody who will. And the process is that person, if they aren't in law enforcement, will notify if they have a reasonable suspicion that there's been abuse, and then it will get investigated. And hopefully the right thing will happen. Either there'll be some sort of an intervention, some sort of a conversation that will end the abuse, or some other action that will end the abuse, so your friend can be protected. And then just be a good friend to them. Unfortunately, I think all of us know someone who has been in a situation that's abusive, and the best thing you can do is empower them to be strong themselves and speak up for themselves and protect themselves to the biggest extent possible.
Yeah, it really depends too on what the suspicion is, what the allegation is, whether somebody will go out and do the investigation or not. In my experience, it really depends. So just because somebody makes a mandated report, just because a teacher says, "Oh, such and such a student told me this," it doesn't mean it's going to set in motion a process. There's a whole triage kind of process that happens, whether Child Protective Services or the police even go out, and then there's a certain randomness to it as well. So it's really hard to know what's going to happen. We can't say, I can, even when I do have to report, I can never say this is what's going to happen because I don't know what's going to happen. So it really depends, and that's scary. I think it's scary when there's that unknown, and I'd encourage you to talk to somebody that you trust. Talk it through if you're not sure. This is what I'm thinking, you know. You can always, I imagine you can talk to the counselors here about, without sharing the name of your friend, and say, you know, I have a friend who blah, 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 what do you think? If you need some support or somebody to kind of bounce some ideas off of.
Even if it's helping them by looking up on the internet hotlines or other types of support, if you feel overwhelmed with what they're going through and providing them with support, even if all you do is print out a page of phone numbers in the Bay Area that can help your friend with whatever they're going through, or help yourself, because I think Francine's absolutely right. Once the report is made, that doesn't mean the abuse is going to stop if there is abuse, and it doesn't mean that it will get the attention that it deserves. So you kind of have to be proactive and be supportive and look for other resources, because law enforcement isn't necessarily capable to investigate the wide range of issues that do come up related to abuse.
Yeah, and ultimately you have to live with yourself, right? How do you feel living with having that knowledge every day and not speaking up? You know, speaking up is hard, but living with that for days and weeks and years could be even harder. But that's a good point about the hotline on these little half sheets. If people have them, there's a youth hotline too. So if you can't find somebody to talk to, you can always pick up the phone and find somebody who will listen.
Okay, here's a simple one. Why does life have so many challenges? We'll move on to this again.
I'm leaving that one for Mitch.
It's for the priests, the rabbis, and the philosophers. Walking to the bar. Yes. Why do you think people blame the victims for the death of Mr. I?
I don't know that any of us could really speak to that authoritatively. I mean, I think he was a well-loved figure, and a lot of people trusted him a lot. You know, and I know there's some speculation that he did it. There's some speculation that he didn't, and everybody, you know, has well, not everybody has a different opinion, but there are varying opinions on this whole thing, and it gets very complicated. I think the one thing to understand is that nobody can make anybody commit suicide. It's nobody's fault except for the person who suicided. And, you know, people are, you know, I was doing I was sat in on a talk that Micheline Beam from where Francine works did, and she was talking about how, you know, a lot of people get accused of a lot of things, and most people don't commit suicide. And the people who do take it upon themselves for whatever reason, or in whatever way they're overwhelmed. They can't tolerate it, they can't deal with it, they're impulsive in the moment and decide to end it. And nobody did that to them. So whatever the allegation was, the suicide itself is on Mr. I. And that's about all I can say about that.
And I think it's also more about the person who's not supportive of the victim, whatever their reaction or process. Sometimes it's disbelief, sometimes it's things like this don't happen, sometimes it's about preserving, you know, this image of somebody as all good when most of us have a lot of good and some bad parts. And again, I have no information about this specific situation with Mr. I, but things are a lot more complicated than we usually want to believe. So.
Okay, this is I know an issue that came up a lot on the patch. To what extent is it okay for media to expose information to the community?
Well, from a legal perspective, I think the media is interested in knowing for a variety of different reasons. But one of the reasons why law enforcement might work with the media is if there is the possibility of multiple victims. They will want that information out so that if there are additional children or individuals who are involved, that they know that there's a way that they can share what happened to them. And it also, in good situations where the victims are treated with respect and honored for making a hard decision of coming forward, it also helps other people who have been through that in their life. And so there are reasons why, positive reasons in some cases, why the media might choose to present as much information as they do. On the other hand, there are sometimes harms that occur to the community, to the victims, to the person who's accused. And so that's probably for a different panel. But they certainly can have access to certain amounts of information legally. And the purpose of that, the reason why the law allows some of that, is to hopefully have other potential victims come forward so that they're safe and protected and supported.
How do we break the culture of silence or secrets among teens?
Right.
Maybe we should ask them.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Throw it back on you. You know, I think it goes back again to feeling comfortable with being able to talk to somebody about it and feeling as though, you know, whatever's going on with you or whatever's going on with your friends is going to be received in a way that you're not going to be judged, that you're not going to be, punished for, you know, and from the parent side, the way that you respond the first time your child comes to you with some difficult material is going to set the tone for whether or not they come to you in the future. Again, you know, finding some space within yourself to kind of listen and manage your own response to it while still attending to, you know, what your kid has to deal with. But
Yeah, as a mom, not as a lawyer, kids forgive your parents if they blew it the first time, and parents forgive your kid, you know, if they don't come to you or they say something that freaks you out. Go back and keep trying.
This is a pretty simple question. Can you get an abortion without the consent of your parents?
Yes. In many circumstances, yes.
Okay. This is a very hard question. Can someone ever be abused to the point where they want to hurt or possibly kill themselves because of some kind of sexual harassment?
Yes.
Anybody want to follow up on that?
well, I think in the ideal world, a relationship, you know, kind of has 5 elements to it. I mean, especially a sexual relationship, it's going to be consensual, it's going to be non-exploitative, it's going to be honest, it's going to be mutually pleasurable, and it's going to be protected against sexually transmitted disease or pregnancy. Unless, of course, you're trying to have a baby. But, you know, check in with yourselves and see whether or not that's true for your relationships. And, you know, if you're feeling exploited and you're feeling like things are not honest and you're feeling like you're not really consenting to what's going on in the relationship, then there's something wrong. And you know, that's another check your gut moment, and try to talk to somebody about it to figure out what to do or get yourself out of the relationship. You know, and hopefully it doesn't get to the point where you want to kill yourself. But you know, in mobile crisis, I see kids all the time who have either tried to kill themselves or are thinking about killing themselves because of a relationship breakup. And you know, it's an intense thing. I mean, that's the whole thing about, you know, teenage relationships are intense. You know, there's a lot of big feelings and there's a lot riding on those relationships. And I don't want to go on too long about this, but a significant number of teenagers, I think it's like 1 out of every 4 teenagers are in an abusive relationship or have been in some kind of abusive relationship. And the abuse can be anything from being forced to perform some kind of sexual act you don't want to perform, being verbally abused, told you're stupid, or told that you're, whatever. Being, for lack of a better word, stalked and held prisoner, where your partner is tracking your every move and not letting you go out with your friends and kind of keeping you contained in one spot. And all that stuff builds up a tremendous amount of stress. It isolates you, and how to pull yourself out of that isolation before it gets to the point where you don't feel like you need to kill yourself. The one thing, the major thing that is the predictor of suicide is despair. Not hopelessness, but despair. People get hopeless, but when they're really despairing, and the hopelessness goes to a point where they just can't see any kind of out, and the feelings are just so big they can't imagine moving beyond it, and they just don't care anymore. That's when they kill themselves. And finding a way to manage things before it gets to that point is kind of the crime.
If someone feels that way, what should they do? If they're a student at Albany High School and they feel that level of despair, what would you recommend they do?
Call a hotline if you don't feel comfortable talking to any of your peers or any of your family or adults in your life, whoever. You can do it anonymously, get some kind of support and figure out a way to manage it. Maybe you have a better
Yeah, you can pick up the phone. There's suicide hotlines. You can Google. I can Google it right now if somebody wants it. Talk to a counselor here. They'll know what to do. Just like Mitch said, it's sort of like you're in this tunnel and you can't see out. You don't believe that there's a way out, but there is a way out. So talk to somebody.
There's 3 questions here that I'll just handle. Okay. Come on up.
A question would be kind of 2-part, one from the psychological point of view and then one from the legal point of view. There's a lot of high school students that are going to turn 18 while they're still in. There's a lot of high school students that are going to turn 18 while they're still in high school, and the laws changed drastically because they're considered adults. And as parents, we all know on their 18th birthday, they're 1 day older than 17. From a medical standpoint, privacy laws become in because they are adults. And from a legal standpoint, they are adults. You can't get information necessarily from a police department on a record, or you can't have access to without permission from that. What's the best approach there as a parent when this kicks in and all of a sudden this huge wall goes up because they're saying they're an adult?
I've heard some people say that, you're 18, so what can you do? You're legally an adult, but you still can't vote. There's still many things that you can't do. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're free to, you don't have as many rights still as somebody who's over 21. So I think teens still need support. They still need their parents. It's a launch, right? It's a gradual launch. It's not a cliff.
But how do you deal with the agencies when they're telling you?
Oh, which agencies?
Well, the medical professional.
Because it can start much earlier than 18, actually. Teens can consent for a lot of different services at 12, 13, 14. So, to me, it's, if your teen's not telling you, how can you and your teen talk? so that you don't have to go to the third person, right, to get that information? Why are they not telling you?
It's such a good question. I have a 17-year-old I wanted to hear the answer to.
That's my answer.
This brochure was out there. It's, you know, when you turn 18, some of the laws that change, and I think sometimes it's a lot safer to be 17 than 18 when you read through this packet. As a parent, one of the things that you can do legally, especially when your kids are going to college, that's kind of a frustrating situation because you're not going to be entitled to health information if they go to the college clinic. And so one of the things you can do is ahead of time find out from the universities or even prepare a release that they sign that gives you permission to have access to all of their confidential medical information. But they have to be willing to agree to that. That's not something you can impose upon them unless they've been found incompetent or mentally unable to make decisions for themselves. So you have to have a relationship with them for you to be able to continue to support them in the way you want to as a parent, keep them safe and healthy.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Question about the particular case. Do you know if the police are still investigating this case? And if yes, will this information be shared with students, parents, community? The answer, the investigation is still going on. And we understand that when it is concluded and the police have completed their reports, they will make some version of it public. I don't know what or when. Next question is a couple questions. What is the, I mean, these two questions together are related. What is the legal age to have sex? And what acts constitute a sexual relationship or sexual abuse for a minor under 14?
I mentioned it earlier, and I think you would be surprised to know that unless you are married, the law provides that you are not able to give consent under the age of 18 for any sort of sexual conduct. And so there are lots of things that constitute sex, but most of it has to do with, actually in the handouts I could probably read to you a graphic description of what that is. If you want one. It's a very long list. You would be surprised. So instead, what I'm going to turn you to is to the website. If you did not get a handout on mandatory reporting, if you did, it would be on the 5th page. There's a definition of sexual abuse, sexual assault, but I think you can see going through those few pages, it is very broad in terms of what is defined as sex. Kissing and holding hands usually is not, for those of you that were wondering.
Okay, great. Interesting question here. We all are, of course. Where is the line drawn between two people who want a relationship, sexual or not, and when it is wrong or illegal, and especially when these people are not forced?
You might want to run that by me again.
What is the line? Where is the line drawn between two people who want a relationship, and when it's okay and when it's wrong or illegal, assuming that nobody's forced?
Okay. Assuming that no one's forced, I think Mitch went over sort of the 5 elements that would be an appropriate sexual relationship among consenting individuals of an age where they can make decisions in a mature and responsible way. In terms of the law is much more strict, and it's in place because the desire of the law is to protect minors from what might be an exploitive relationship, from what might be a bad decision, and many of those decisions have lifelong consequences. It may not be relevant to every 17-year-old or 16-year-old, but for the most part, the reason for the law is to provide protection for minors.
What do you think is the best way for teens to start a sex conversation with their parents?
Well, last night, I showed my kids these handouts, and we had a conversation. But I think for those of you that are here, you can use this evening's discussion as the perfect opportunity to make it a little bit more objective and not as personal, and maybe that could lead to some sincere conversations.
Yeah. When I have something difficult to talk about, I always start by saying, this is really hard for me to talk about. I'm not sure if I should talk about it with you. I feel really uncomfortable. You know, talk about the talking about. You know, can you just listen to me, Dad or Mom, before you know, tell me what to do or tell me to be quiet or run in the other room screaming and crying. And then see what they say. You know, do you have time? Do you have half an hour right now? Do you have 10 minutes? And then see what kind of response you get. You know, that's how I would start it. And then go from there.
Then give them a book.
Yeah.
There are opportunities everywhere to start conversations about this stuff. I mean, the media, television shows that you watch, there's always some kind of sexual situation that comes up, and it's like some crazy thing, like 70% of the content on TV has something to do with the sexual situation. You know, so you come across things on the internet, you come across things watching TV, on the radio, movies. You know, as a parent, sit down with your kid and watch the show and use it as a teachable moment. I hate the term, but it's true. You know, to sit down, so what'd you think about that? Or, you know, you ever come across anything like that? Whatever it is. But, you know, you don't have to do it in like one big serious chunk. You know, make it an ongoing discussion, make it comfortable, make it part of your everyday kind of communication, and normalize it.
Right. Give yourself time to freak out on the side and
Yeah,
then
exactly.
come back later. You need practice, just like anything. I think talking, communicating, if that's not your norm, you got to practice it, and then it will get easier. It will get easier. You just have to keep trying and don't give up.
Sorry.
Is it okay for an over 18-year-old student to have a relationship with a teacher?
And over 18 is such a broad sky of ages. If they're currently a student, then the answer is no.
And we assume with the teacher that they are a student of.
Right. If they're currently a student, the answer is no. And relationship, not just a friendship. You mean a sexual relationship, right? I think is what the question is. So.
Okay. If you yourself are grieving, how should you help others who are also grieving?
Let others know that you're grieving. Really, you know, it's sort of, you know, it's a camaraderie thing in some ways. You know, it's some people are embarrassed about it and feel like, you know, their feelings are too big, and if they know somebody else is out there who's having some grief reactions, you know, they feel more comfortable talking about it, and as though there's someone out there who understands what they're going through, and it makes it easier for them to talk about.
Mm-hmm. So if you're a parent and you are responsible for supporting your grieving child, then you might want to get some support so that you have something left to support your child. And then taking care of yourself, in modeling taking care of yourself, I think is so important. If you're taking care of yourself, then that leaves the other person to not have to take care of you, if that makes any sense. And you're modeling for them how to take care of themselves in their grieving as well. So.
Okay. There's several questions here about, you know, underage sexual activities, such as it illegal to have oral sex under the age of 18?
Again, that is one of the sexual activities which is illegal for a minor to consent to. So anyone under 18 to two 16-year-olds engaging in that behavior under the eyes of the law, that it's not legally permissible. But in terms of child abuse reporting, it is probably not a mandated report for an educator of a school.
Can you get birth control without your parents' permission?
Yes. Yes.
Can you talk about anything on a hotline, such as drugs, alcohol, sex?
Yes, definitely.
We're just looking through these things, aren't we?
The great thing about the hotline too is you can call anonymously. I mean, they're not going to ask you. They might ask your name. You can give them a fake name. It doesn't matter as long as you're talking to somebody. You get to, some people just feel more comfortable if they're really talking anonymously to somebody, and that's okay.
You're often talking to somebody in Michigan or Minnesota, or they're not going to come and find you and knock on your door. I mean, if they're really concerned about you, they may try to get you to get some help, but they can't find you.
And if the first person you call is sensitive to what you're going through, again, Francine's perfect advice is there are other hotlines you can call.
Yeah.
So get the help you need.
Question to the school. Do you, the school, report unwanted advances that happen at a child's home? And the answer is yes. If it appears there's a suspicion of something that's inappropriate, we do make such reports. And oftentimes, basically what we do is we make a phone call to the Child Protective Services Agency or to the police, have a conversation. They make a decision about whether we need to file a formal report. And that's a point that I think is really important for all of us to remember, is that we don't make a decision about whether something is inappropriate or not, or whether it's illegal or not, or constitutes child abuse or not. If we have a suspicion, as has been said, it's our obligation as mandated reporters to make at least the phone call to one of these agencies and let them make the decision about whether we should file the report. If someone has a mental illness such as social anxiety and can't express themselves easily and figure out if a relationship is a good functioning one, how would bystanders, friends go about discussing this?
Bystanders and friends, not the person who's
So not the person who is
social
experiencing.
So I guess the question is how to talk to somebody who's got a social anxiety disorder or something like that, right? Right. I keep giving these one-word answers, but sensitively. I think just because somebody has a social anxiety disorder or some other kind of disorder doesn't mean that that they're crazy or that they're too fragile to manage in the world or that they can't hear information. They just have difficulties in a particular area. And so, I mean, really you can talk to them like you would talk to anybody else about it, express your concerns, and express, that, and ask them what's going on. And if they can't express themselves, be patient, help them talk about it if you can. And if they can't talk to you about it and they admit there's something wrong, encourage them to go see a therapist who can help them unravel some of the communication issues that they have. Right.
Yes, definitely.
So she said for the person, and this is for the person who wants to talk to the person with the anxiety, if you don't know how to do it, go talk to the school counselor and get some advice. Go talk to somebody who has some experience in that area and get some advice about it so that you have some kind of framework when you go in to talk to them. That's great.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know how the counseling works here, but at Berkeley High, there's often friends who pull friends in or friends who come in to talk to counselors to say, what do I do about my friend and this issue? How do I go about that? So you can use counselors to help you help other people too.
A lot of times in cases that I'm dealing with school districts, a friend will tell, it might even be a group, it might be 3 or 4 young ladies or gentlemen, and they might say, you know, you need to talk to the counselor. I'm too afraid, I don't want to talk about it, I'm embarrassed. No, you need to go, come with me. And they'll come in a group, and counselors are trained in how to support that student in that situation, and maybe guide the other ones out the room once the student who's concerned feels more comfortable. But you know, if you don't force your friend, but if you can encourage your friend and support them in that initial conversation, it can go a long way.
So there's a great many questions that have been asked in cards. I've asked many questions. I have to make selections, of course, but I do want to end on a positive suggestion with our last question. And that is, what are some ways that people can release their stress without getting help from others, besides the most common ways such as listening to music or going on a walk?
Talk about that. Exercise, besides going on a walk? Any kind of physical cardio exercise, regular exercise, journaling, art, music, anything that feels good. Do things that feel good. Do things that have some kind of physical release. And then all the basic things, you know, eat well, sleep well, keep up your routines, be good to yourself, give yourself a break, find some distraction. Anything else?
Watch YouTube videos of kittens.
Yeah, watch kittens. Breathing. There's all kinds of apps these days for breathing and relaxing, and
there was actually research on that about 2 weeks ago, that people who would see pictures of cats would do better in the workplace.
nature.
Don't isolate yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, don't isolate yourself. Okay, on that great statement, I do want us all to thank Mitch, Karen, and Francine for their time. And just a couple reminders. First of all, as soon as our broadcast journalism finishes it, they will post the video on the website. We'll announce that. All the flyers we posted on our website. Don't forget the survey, the PTSA survey for future education events. And students, if you need an administrator to sign off on your extra credit, Ms. Banal and Ms. Charlop are going to be signing out there, although I must warn you, Ms. Charlop is going to charge $10. So you might want to go to Ms. Banal. All right, thank you all for coming. Have a great night. Well, you made it.
Is his responsible? You've been tuning into Albany High School's panel discussion on choices, responsibilities, and self-protection for teens. Tonight's broadcast is made possible by and can be seen on KALB Albany TV. The broadcast will also be available on albanystudentbroadcasting.com. It takes many people to make these Albany student broadcasts possible. Our director tonight is Ryan Glatt. Lainey Maris is our producer. Our technical director is Liz Creeder-Killian. Our audio engineer is Hannah Lehman, assisted by Kefren Gorey. Our broadcast engineer is Ori Maus. Camera operators tonight are Pasong Wemo, Sabrina Lerma, and Han Yen. For Albany Student Broadcasting, I'm Lizzie Asarno.